Hello, and welcome back to the Extra Literary Affairs podcast. Today, Joey and I are going to go a little off script, and we are going to provide some commentary and some reaction to a opinion piece that we both read in the New York Times by David Brooks called When Novels Mattered. And this came my way via Ann Patchett, who does a really great job of talking about books and celebrating just the lusciousness of being in the literary world. I listened to her response before I read the article. I have since read David Brooks' opinion piece. I've let it sit for a couple of days. And Joey, I am very, very excited to hear where you landed on the points that Mr. Brooks made about literary fiction in America and who's reading and who's not.
I generally would say that I disagree with him. I generally disagree. But I would say that there are some things that I do agree with him. And I would be like, okay, I see what you're saying, sir. I can see where you're coming from and why you're saying these things. I have not read anything else by him. I don't know him. I don't follow him on social media if he's on social media. But my guess is that he is not on social media or he's not paying attention to social media, because I think his point is, at least what I got from this, one of the points is that there is a vacuum that was created for a plethora of reasons that literary fiction, like hardcore literary fiction, and we've talked about the definition a million times, so I don't want to redefine it now, that it was such a ubiquitous thing with writers like Toni Morrison and Alice Walker, and he named some other ones, but those are the ones I can remember off the top of my head. Who of course did amazing things. Beloved, Paradise, Jazz from Toni Morrison, and then obviously The Color Purple from Alice Walker. These are fantastic books. I've read them and I love them. The Color Purple's my favorite triad of things: book, movie, musical. Love every iteration of that. So I get that. But I think that he's missing the point that on social media, these conversations are still happening, but they're happening much more directly and they're happening faster. So back before the proliferation of the internet, which he does comment on, I don't know that that's the problem. I don't know that that's what's causing this. Information got to us much slower, as it obviously did. You either had to wait for a news program to come on at whatever time of day that it came on, a newspaper that was coming out. I don't know how many times does a newspaper come out a day? Just at
At
one
one
time a
time in
day.
my
Okay.
town,
Maybe just in a movie when it's like, oh, breaking news, and there's a kid that's like throwing newspapers around. Anyway, that's just fiction. You can have these conversations on social medias, on platform like TikTok, where something happens, people can immediately comment on it for good or for bad. They could be giving us mis or disinformation, unfortunately, but these conversations can happen. We can talk about these really hard topics, anything that people might think of as maybe as controversial, which I don't think it usually they're not controversial.
appreciate that, Joey, because after hearing Ann Patchett's to this particular article, I was fired up. I was like, "Oh, I can't wait to read this. I am really mad." That dissipated pretty quickly because when he points to someone else's research about the number of people in the US who are reading literary fiction has gone down very, very dramatically since the 80s. And they're like, remember in the 80s and the 90s, there was not this beautiful thing called the internet. It was not pervasive in every corner. So people had sort of lost their for literary fiction. It was already starting to go into decline. And his point that I did appreciate, a lot of his were offensive to me, and he calls me out directly. The people were called out directly in his article. So I think he was wanting to get a response or to have a very clear point of view. The cachet that used to come from being a writer, we think about this romantic time of Ernest Hemingway and Saul Bellow. And yes, I'm naming a lot of dead white guys, and did mention, as you said, a couple of standouts. He does call out Margaret Atwood and Barbara Kingsolver, but he paints them with a brush that they're just liberals waving the flag, that's what very abusive to me. The point of this is that I am concerned, and I have noticed larger context, that there is not a lot of unity around what a good literary fiction book is. You don't just walk down the street and take a look, at what books people are physically reading and everyone's reading the same book. And does have a point about that, that in several great books discussion groups, we meet in a book club, Joey. So we are people. So our currency in which we communicate with people, but it's sometimes rare in the larger social circle that I can bring up the name of a very established writer in mind. You ever read this? And they're like, no, but I've read all of these other people that I don't recognize because they're genre fiction. And it's an interesting context he had in the article. He said, basic literature for what are these authors historically, what were they for and what are they for now? And he said being bold, being the voice of your generation, of being able to really synthesize all of these competing forces and this beauty and get it down on paper. And he says that seems to be missing at this moment. And I'm going to sit with that and think about it and see, can I find examples where I feel that the voice of a generation or a very distinct cultural moment was expressed in beautiful prose that we could be like, take a look there, sir.
I think part of the issue is that consumerism and capitalism. Now, favorite books would probably just call me a bleeding heart liberal or a crying liberal, whatever the hell you
Or
would say.
worse. He's call you something worse, Joey.
Yeah, but here's my reason why. Because I was actually just listening to another podcast with horror authors. One of them, her name's DM Gay. She's like an indie author, and I love her, and I follow her on Patreon. I have all her books. I always order them signed. I always sign up for the Christmas card every year. I'm a fan. Okay, I'm a huge fan. I've read literally everything that she's written. And she was talking about how some new authors will come out and say, you don't know what to write? Research what's the top selling things on popular book selling outlets like Barnes & Noble or Amazon, bookshop.org, wherever you buy books, and write that genre. Just write the same thing because that's what's going to make you money. And so I think this is part of the problem. It's not that people are trying to get rich quick scheme, because writing books is hard, but I think if you are looking at what's going on social media and how all of these up and coming books that skyrocket into popularity, and they're getting movies made from them or TV shows, and they're getting special editions printed before the books even come out, and you're like, okay, but no one's read it. We don't know if it's good yet. I think those books tend to be criticized for being less than great. But I think the point is that people are writing to a market and they're not trying to meet the moment and capture a zeitgeist, which was something that Toni Morrison is trying to do. She's trying to explore these really big existential questions. Anybody that's watched any interviews with Toni Morrison talking about her writing process, that's usually what she would say, is that she starts with a question and then she figures out how the question is going to be answered with whichever book that she was writing. But I think that the times have changed for good, for ill, and that the reasons people write books have changed. And maybe it's because it could be more lucrative for people now. And so they're trying to make as much money as they can possibly get. And there's a huge demand on authors, once they have something that's successful, to get the next ones out. A lot of people are writing series, especially in genre fiction. So there's a huge pressure from these publishing houses to hurry up because you're trying to fill the demand before the demand leaves. Granted, the internet did mess up our attention spans, and I agree with him on that, okay? That's a part of the problem. How do you market to people that constantly are changing what they're going after? So if you don't provide the product on time for them, then they just move on and somebody else is going to get all of that money. So I think that's also part of the problem. But I do think, to Ann Patchett's point, there are plenty of people who are doing the same things that Toni Morrison or Ernest Hemingway or Alice Walker or any of these literary fiction writers are doing. But for whatever reason, it doesn't seem like he's reading them. And Ann Patchett said the same thing. What are you talking about? There's so many.
Yeah, she had a stack, I think probably 10 books high. And she's like, how about this
Yeah.
one? How about this one? And it was a little thrilling moment for me. I'm like, yes, I've read that one. Yes, I've read that one. And Joey, when I was reading Mr. Brooks' opinion piece, I respect the fact that he has a very clear view of what he thinks the problem is. And I always want to say, is there merit into someone's art? Is there something there for me that I need to think about or refine my own understanding? And things I loved what you said about the commercialism. It's like writers who are up and coming They probably have student loans. They might have families to feed. It's like they need a financial return on this time investment to write, going to write. But I also wonder if people are reading these more, I don't have a good word for it, so I'm not going to get the words right. More flashy, more quick, more surface level, interesting genre fiction pieces that in my mind are kind of like fast food. It's good, it's comfortable. It's not going to sustain you long term. It may not hold up 10 years from now, but right now it feels great and we are just going to consume it. As we talk often on this podcast about the timelessness of the stories that we're reading. And I wonder, I have a operating theory, and I do not know this, and I believe probably the people who are listening to our podcast are also readers, so we're probably not asking the right group of people. Why don't you read more literary fiction? Is it that you are not familiar with it, or you think it's old and stodgy, or you just have not encountered anything that was good in the popular things that you're reading? So you're like, why would I waste my time reading? Like, I could watch a movie, I could do something else. And Brooks made a beautiful statement when he said that there is no other medium other than literature and theater where you can get inside the mind of another person so directly, right? It's this empathy machine that we talk about a lot. If you are reading, you are feeling, you are in it, you're considering your own humanity, your place in the world, how everything fits together. It I don't want to say it's hard, but it's not a surface level one and done type of thing. Great literature lingers. And so I'm super curious about the fragment of our society. Is an author that's going to appeal to everyone? No, we're all very different. But is there enough of a commonality that we can agree that having moving experiences through the written word has value? Commercial value, although would come, but there is like a value for our society to have a common language. And Joey, I'll just leave it on this point because this is so near and dear to my heart. We met in an online book club, people from all over the world. We had a shared experience by talking about literature. We came from different places, different incomes, different age groups, different sexualities, different everything. But we had common ground and we could share these experiences in a very deep and meaningful way that bridged those gaps. And I just be great if more people were experiencing the power of walking down the street, holding a book by Ann Patchett, and somebody sees you like, oh my gosh, I love that author. I just read something by her, and start up a conversation with a stranger to help bridge some of the division that we have because the books are not political. The books don't have a point of view that are going to separate us. It's an opportunity for us to have discussions.
Literacy rates in the United States are declining, and that there's a concerted effort to ban as many books as humanly possible. And I have some data. I will cite my source before I got this chart. In 2017, 416 books were banned or challenged and banned. And in 2022, 2,571 books. I mean, that's 3 years old now. Okay, so that's a huge jump. And it's not slowing down. Book banning is not new, but there's a lot of urgency behind the people who want to push these things. And the things that get banned are Toni Morrison, Harper Lee, Lolita, all of these important works for us to be reading to understand the history of literature and to gain empathy. People are actively trying to stop people from reading. And I think part of the issue then is we don't have access to it. So when people, this is obviously going to affect kids in school or teenagers. They don't have access to these titles because they've been pulled from their schools. Then that becomes a very elitist sort of thing to say, well, someone could buy it for you. Not everyone can have money to access these books. Going to Barnes & Noble, they don't have extra funds for that kind of thing. So they would rely on these systems like the school libraries. This is a complicated issue and I don't have the solution, but I definitely think that people don't have the skills to read these works anymore. And I'm not saying everyone, I'm generalizing, and that's not fair. There are people who, because literacy rates are going down, our educational system is being gutted, and there's so many other reasons. How do you approach something like Beloved by Toni Morrison? It's a hard book to read if you don't have anyone there to guide you to read it. And if you don't have the patience and the confidence to say like, okay, this is going to take me a while, but I can make sense of it if I read it slowly, if I take notes, if I highlight, if I try to watch people discuss it, if I read literary criticism and have like this well-rounded experience. If you don't have that skill set, I can totally understand why people just gravitate to these genre fiction, something like Fourth Wing, which I've never read and I'm not knocking because I've never read it, so I can't talk about it. But people criticize that for being very vapid and sort of like what you're saying is like fast food. This is not going to last. This is a trend, a fad, and it will die, once that's over. And maybe it will, maybe it won't. I have no idea. I can't tell the future. But I think it's much easier if someone wants to read and enjoys the activity of reading to pick up something that is easily digestible instead of sitting there with something like Lolita and being like, this language is too elevated. The vocabulary is too expansive. I don't understand why he's writing about a pedophile. I'm now talking about Ulysses. We're taking that one out. Or Virginia Woolf. Virginia Woolf is hard to read. It's a really great experience when you take the time. But yeah, it's because we have these attention spans that are continuously getting shorter and shorter. I'm not blaming society at doing that. There are other causes for that or whatever. But it's really hard to sit and try and to binge read Virginia Woolf. You could do it, but you're not going to be able to take away quite as much as if you were to dip in and out. So the thing that I don't agree with him on this article, though, is it felt sort of conservative at the end when he's talking about how political parties and that the left is more uniform and is intolerant, especially like in a blue state like Massachusetts. But he doesn't say intolerant of what? What is the question that you're asking them? And that the right is sort of open and they'll accept more things. They could have a varied opinion on things, whether it's gun reform or immigration. I don't know. I mean, I get this is your opinion, sir, but it's generally not the way that it goes. Usually it's the right that is intolerant. And I wrote down in my notes, like, are you talking about in Boston that people are intolerant of intolerance? Because that's like what I'm getting from this. And he talks about cancel culture, which I'm like, oh my God, how many times does someone have to explain this? Nobody can stop you from talking, okay? But people can stop listening. They can stop reading. They can stop their subscription to the New York Times if they don't agree. But they're not telling you you can't talk. You talk, but now you have a smaller amount of people that you can talk to. And it sounded like, and I've heard this argument before from other people where they're like, you can't say anything anymore. It's like, no, you can say it. Say it. What do you want to say? You should just say it. But you do have to face the consequences of that, whether you're hurting someone's feelings because you said something completely insensitive, or you're offending an entire community of people because you're generalizing them and using harmful stereotypes. But there are repercussions. You're an adult. This is life.
I appreciate that, Joey, because when you were discussing that, I was thinking, oh, you know what? The most subversive thing we can do is host book clubs, bring diverse groups of people together to actually walk through concepts and talk about books, to bring this shared experience, regardless of where you are in your political sphere. And this is not my idea. I read an article about it. And there's a person who's actually making this his life's mission is to get local book clubs face to face with your neighbors and sit down and talk about either nonfiction books, talking about politics, history, these types of things, or literary fiction, to say when we are encountering racism or sexism or misogyny or pedophilia or any of these difficult topics that are taboo generally to discuss in polite society, this is a vehicle to explore those things. And Joy, when you were talking about the types of books that are getting banned, yes, some of these are what I will call spicy topics. They are difficult concepts. They do require some finesse and some sophistication, but that's exactly why children need to be exposed to them, to learn to think, to learn that there are other things. And if you are writing a book only to be provocative, I'm just going to use all of the swear words I know in a single paragraph, and then I'm going to make a rude drawing, and I'm going to be like, this is my book. Let's send it to kindergartners because I put a dog on the cover with a flower. So that definitely is for them. I do appreciate that there are some things that are not appropriate for young kids, and they do need to be shielded for that. But talking about racism or violence in the home or some of these very difficult topics that are done in such a beautiful, well-crafted way, summarily saying, we don't talk about that. We don't talk about sexual assault. Well, if you don't talk about sexual assault, how is a child going to know if something happens to them? How are they going to be on guard for racism and sexism and prejudice of all forms or homophobia? How are they going to even know what the options are? I will get off my soapbox on this, but I just felt very privileged as a child to kind of have better access to what was ever in the library. And if something caught my fancy, I wanted to read it. And I do remember as a teenager, like reading things in Time Magazine and Newsweek. And I was just like, oh, I feel so sophisticated because I had a New Yorker subscription when I was 16, being able to talk about things in New York like Mapplethorpe and is it pornography? Is it art? What is vulgar? It was important as a young person to decide those things for myself before having all of my options limited. So I will just leave it that I don't think less access to quality literature is the solution to anything. Joe, I really appreciate having the space to discuss this with you. And I'm sure that these topics will continue to come up. And I love this bonus material that we have for our listeners. And look forward to hearing from anyone who has a contrary opinion or would like to support the cause. So we'll see you next time.